palm off. Mountain back to Atlantic Ocean. Upon me hills to Pocondre. To educate, elevate, and promote. Yeah. Focus on Liberia. For Liberia, Liberia. For Liberia, yeah. From Monday to Sunday. From Monday to Sunday. It's focus on Liberia. Talk about home affairs. Hey. In diaspora. Current affairs. Reliable information. History. Talking about culture. Politics. Education. Entertainment. Business. Sports. Advertisement. Articulation. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. From Monday to Sunday. Focus on.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a noonday broadcast where we delve into transformative dialogues about social justice and the voices leading a charge for social reforms.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Priscilla, and thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, at a noonday, we explore the intersections of politics, culture, and tradition with the leaders who are reshaping our world for the better. A noonday focuses on critical dialogues around social justice, with emphasis on gender justice to influence policies and contribute to societal shifts. Alert. The following discussion or conversation we are about to have may contain details of a graphic nature. Viewers are advised to be sensitive viewers and for the sake of manners. So recently, the Liberian Legislature approved the resolution to establish a war crimes court in Liberia. This represents a new day of development in the nation's long pursuit of justice and accountability for the atrocities committed during its civil wars from 1979 to 2003. This court aims to prosecute those who bear the most significant responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed during this period. The legislature decision reflects a significant shift toward addressing past human rights violations, aiming to heal the nation's wounds and deter future atrocities. Notably, the War Crimes Court has been in discussion for many years, and its realization marks a crucial step in Liberia's journey towards reconciling with its past and enforcing the rule of law. The resolution's passage also indicates a robust decision to finally confront the legacy of impunity that has affected the country's post-conflict. This development is particularly significant considering the court's establishment had been delayed for years, despite Liberia's Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. The TRC was established to investigate gross human rights violations and violations of international humanitarian law, as well as abuses that occurred during the conflicts, including massacres, rapes, and the use of child soldiers. So now that the legislature has done this, it marks a new day of reform in our country's pursuit of justice and accountability. We therefore invited a prominent Liberian and a global thought leader on justice and accountability issues, Mr. Aaron Weah. Our aim today is to delve deeply into the experiences and insights of our guests, fostering a comprehensive discussion on the implications, expectations, and prospects of the War Crimes Court in Liberia. A little bit about Mr. Aaron Weah. Mr. Aaron Weah is a newly appointed director of the Duke Institute for Social and Economic Research. Mr. Weah is a final year PhD scholar at the Transitional Justice Institute, University of Ulster in Northern Ireland, UK, and has been a founding fellow supporting research and institutional development at the Institute. His previous experience includes serving as the country director of the Search for Common Ground Liberia program and as a policy analyst at Liberia's Governance Commission. Mr. Weah's scholarship is focused on the impact of political violence on post-war Liberia, transitional justice, memory and identity, grassroots memory, ethno-nationalism, and state and nation building. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Weah. It's good to have you on a noonday.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Okay. So because I have a lot of questions for you, a lot to talk about, I'm just going to just go into it. Um, you have had a lot of experiences, years of experience, uh, uh, working in strengthening local civil society organizations. So, given your expertise in strengthening local civil society and your involvement with international justice organizations, what capacity building measures are crucial for the success of the War Crimes Court in Liberia? What foundational steps are essential for the War Crimes Court to function effectively in Liberia's unique context?
Well, thank you. I think we are firstly at a place where we have both houses, the Senate and the legislature, are finally in concurrence, and I've been speaking to a few Liberian jurists in terms of what is the next step. So now that we have the Senate has concurred, does it go back to the president? What happens after that? It goes to the president, they write up the law, and it comes back, and the law is enacted, or the bill is enacted into a law. So there is some lack of clarity exactly in terms of the procedural next step, what is expected to happen to have this thing written up in fine prints. In terms of capacity building, the Liberian legal system, international law violation is new to the Liberian. You don't find that in the Liberian Penal Code, for example. So if we go back to Sierra Leone after the Lome Peace Agreement in 1999, and when Tijen Kaba and the Sierra Leonean government made the determination that we need to establish a special code for Sierra Leone, there was some capacity deficit in terms of how many Sierra Leoneans are trained to deal with, to help support this. So similar question, similar situation, applies to Liberia. Is the Louis Arthur School the only school of law that we depend on to train lawyers to think about legal issues in our society? How adequate is the manpower coming out of the Louis Arthur Graham that will serve as the initial personnel to support the code is definitely going to be a super national endeavor. You're going to have international jurists, you're going to have international lawyers, so it's not going to be an all Liberian affair. It's going to be Liberian driven, but the issues that have been investigated are outside of the Liberian legal system. International law violation, issues of war crimes are not things that the Liberian code deals with. So it means there has to be some urgency in terms of how can we prepare how can we prepare Liberian lawyers to be involved with this. So in terms of capacity building, that has to happen in terms of especially Liberians who are already lawyers trained into the general knowledge of Liberian law need to go a step further in going through some quick training in terms of international law, developing case files, because there has to be a lot of clarification on what is the significance of the TRC report. But as significant as the TRC report is, the investigation on war crimes is going to be a little different from what the TRC report has produced. So if I'm accused in of war crimes, the team of lawyers looking into that allegation is going to develop a fresh new file, a case file. All right, Aaron Weah did X, Y, and Z. Where was he based? He was based maybe in Bapulu County. So there will be a team of lawyers that go in there and ask all of the questions and start to develop a file. And as a lawyer, you have to be trained in knowing how to conduct an investigation. How much has Louis Arthur prepared the students to engage with that sort of investigation of war crimes? I'm not so sure. But what I think needs to happen, there has to now be maybe the Bar Association working along with the government of Liberia, or the Louis Arthur working with the government of Liberia to put forth young Liberians who can be trained in developing case file. That's one area of capacity building. The second area of capacity building, in my view, has to be clear facts developed around what the War Crimes Code is all about. The TRC report investigate the political violence from 1979 to October 2003. But with 1979, it had the act that established the TRC had a backward flexibility, which means that the commission at the time could listen, or the commission entertain petitions that preceded 1979. So we're talking about a long period in Liberian history. However, since this code is going to be focused on war crimes, it's only going to be preoccupied with the period of war in Liberia. And that period of war is December 24th, 1989 to October 2003. It means all of the 80s during the period of Samuel Doe, in the 70s during the period of the Trowick Party, they do not qualify as period of war. It means, as tragic as 1980 was, with the execution of the speaker, the execution of the Senate pro tempore, the execution of prominent Liberians, and on the 22nd of April 1980, those executions will not be admitted as part of the proceedings of war crimes. How is the society going to deal with that? Because you're going to have certain ethnic groups feel that people might be harsh in judging that, well, this is the war crime that's only looking at the period of the Civil War. What happened to Liberians who were killed in the 80s? It's not going to look at that. Then you go during the period of the Rest Riot, those who lost their lives, and it's not going to be investigated. So how do we prepare the society to accept that when a war crimes code is established, it is primarily concerned with period of war and not all political violence? So there has to be a certain level of communication in a most accessible form to villages, to towns, to the larger society, because issues of war crimes can be very technical. People like you and myself understand what it is because we pay attention to some of the details, but the ordinary Liberian or the older Liberians who haven't paid much time to this will think that, all right, the assault at the University of Liberia in 1984 will be investigated. The killing of officials of government when the PRC took over will be investigated. No, it's not going to be investigated. There have been a number of Q&As, fact sheets that I have been a part of on the issues of what is war crime, what is not war crimes. This is the time to bring back some of the Q&As. The role you are playing on it is a new day. A new day. I think it's a very good platform, a good civic platform for you to contribute to that sort of capacity building that you're talking about. So there has to be, on the one hand, just to sum this up, on the one hand, there has to be Liberian lawyers who are really involved in this. It might require some upgrade on the basic law training so that they understand how international law works, how to develop case file, and then there has to be a whole discussion on what is considered war crimes and what is not considered war crimes, and period of Liberian history that will not be investigated. That
Okay.
also that also has to be part of it. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, like you said, our noonday platform is informing and facilitating conversation and discussion on human rights issues. You know, human rights issues are part of social justice issues. So your response kind of sounds like a segue to my next question, or the next issue that was going to be, or I think it underscore the significance of human right education. So, do you think why we, you know, think about empowering lawyers? Because, like, I took it for granted that uh, is the Louis Arthur School of the law school. Lawyers are abreast of international laws and how it works and war crimes. I took that for granted. I assume that this is all part of the learning process at the law school. But I was thinking about at the grassroots level or for the ordinary person. So, can we integrate the education of human rights as an educational as an educator? How can you discuss the synergy between education and justice? How do you integrate your academic role with practical transitional justice efforts, like, at the community level is what I'm thinking about.
Okay. Education and transitional justice. That's a very interesting way to put it. The way I will approach this question would be, how do we have a more difficult conversation about what really happened in Liberia, and how do we break it down so that it is not as simplistic as civil society advocacy has made it to appear. What do I mean by this? Uh, we the Truth and Reconciliation Commission talk about 250,000 persons were killed in Liberia. Some of that
Mhm.
was as a result of direct violence. Some of that was as a result of conditions created as a
Mm.
result of the war. That's huge, and that's a tragedy in a way. Uh, what I think has been missing in much of the conversation that civil society has engaged with is to recreate a context of 1990, to recreate the context, the different periods of the Civil War, so that the majority of the society we have today, young kids who are 19, who are 20, so that they can know, so they get to understand that the Civil War we had in Liberia was a dangerous uh, part of the Liberian society. The figure 250,000, you just didn't have ex-combatant crossing the border and shooting up people. You had a society, you had neighbors who turned against neighbors. You also had the issue of ethnicity, where some people were killed primarily because they belonged to a particular ethnic group. We need to have that, what you are referring to as a human rights education. The reason why that is important is that the the main question in every society is like, how do we want Liberia to come out of this experience? If we have a war crimes court that runs for 5 to 7 years, Sierra Leone was too long. Sierra Leone was around 11 to 12 years. I don't think any donor is going to fund a war crimes code that is that long. So part of the discussion internationally is how can we fund hybrid tribunals that are more efficient, and, and more and more effective in the use of resources. So the question here is, when Liberia goes through this, will we be a better society, or will we be the same? And the way to respond to that question is to be honest about what the war was about. The category of victim perpetrator, we have to be a little careful how we try to explain that. You had a situation in Liberia where a young kid, age 15, 16, his mother was killed. And in defense of himself and out of anger for his mother being killed, he takes her arm and he killed up a lot of people. This man is known to be a perpetrator, but people ignore the fact that he was first a victim. The best way to teach a society is to let people know that this is a natural response by a human being. If
Yeah.
someone if someone life is threatening, if you take away his loved one, you're going to bring out the worst in him. This is part of the healing process, so that we do not make perpetrators appear like demons, like some monsters. They were regular people who were looking at tomorrow, who are looking at the future in a different way. The war comes and co-opted them, and we saw the worst that has come out of them. The second thing, with the 200 plus massacre sites we have around the country, how did this massacre happen? Was there cooperation between communities and warring factions that targeted certain communities, that targeted a certain ethnic group? These are the conversations that need to happen. Until these conversations happen, we may put a few persons away, but the country will not come out of this, will not come out of this transformed, will not come out of this with the mirror in his face and say, yes, we did some horrible things in Liberia. We really never want to go back to it. The way we can guarantee that is to be careful with the categories that we are discussing. This person is a victim, this person is a perpetrator. These are neat categories that are problematic, because the Civil War was not as neat as we're trying to make it appear. There were victims, perpetrators, and there were ethnic groups, people were killed. And so the human rights education you're talking about has to go back to, how do we have a more difficult conversation about the tragedy in Liberia? And having that conversation will be the first step in showing that the society come out of this experience uh, purified, come out of this experience where our consciences are troubleshooted in the right way, come out of this experience where we think that, yes, we went through a very difficult experience. We don't deserve to go through this again. And the way to do that is to see every Liberian uh, that I could have been in that role, and not to say this guy is terrible. He'd kill all of these people. Before you come to your next question, I just want to say, in Rwanda, a few days ago, Rwanda celebrated 30 year of the Rwandan genocide. Some of the
Yeah.
people, some of the people involved in the Rwandan genocide were priests. Some of those involved in the Rwandan genocide were medical doctors. These were people who were trained
For
to save lives.
journalists.
Journalists. There were people who were trained to save lives, whether spiritually or whether scientifically. But these were the people who took lives in the Rwandan genocide. Why did the society go that low? That's the same question we need to ask in Liberia. If we want the war crime code experience to have a meaningful impact in Liberia, we need to understand the context, the environment that produced the violence. We need to understand the the, the the attitude that shaped the environment, and we need to be able to interrogate that, so much so that we say, yes, people who did these things, they did these things because of these reasons. It's not
Okay.
a form
So
of justifying it, but just to try to understand the opportunity that led to all of these things. Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I agree to the extent, like you said, it's not to justify it. So, but drawing from your international experience, and I know you mentioned Sierra Leone. And yesterday I was watching the Rwanda uh, uh, commemoration of the genocide. So, which global best practices do you think are most adaptable and beneficial for Liberia's war crimes court? Like, will you share how international best practices from your work with ICTJ and Search for Common Ground could be adapted for Liberia's context, especially concerning the war crimes court?
In terms of the best practice, I think every context is different. It's a little tricky where even next
Or
to
is there
Sierra Leone,
anything that we could adapt from global context or somewhere that you have worked or studied?
yeah, well, one the Sierra Leone, the UN and other places they are moving away now from establishing a special court like we had a special court in Sierra Leone. So we might have now a hybrid code in Liberia. The special code and a hybrid code, there's some slight difference in there.
Mhm.
So Liberia might move more towards a hybrid or a hybrid code. And some of the lessons or best practices is to have these things done in a rather efficient done efficiently, and efficiency in this context has to do with, can we do all of this in 5 years, can we do all of this in 6 years, rather than the way Sierra Leone went and did all of that in 11 years, 12 years. And Sierra Leone was able to investigate 13 perpetrators, but then only 9 was sentenced and did time. In Liberia, how do we want to learn from Sierra Leone in terms of that? Part of the
Mhm.
criticism of the Sierra Leone process was it was almost, I think, 350 million, 350 million, and you only put 9% away. How can the society benefit? That's almost 70% of the Liberian budget, 350 million, or maybe 60% of the Liberian budget for a year. That's a lot of money. And
Yeah.
then how do we want to do this? To do one of the best practice is to be able to learn from the mistakes of Sierra Leone. The process was long and worn out, and in the process, were only 9 persons from a civil war that was as destructive as Liberia. In the case of Liberia, how can we learn from this? Would be to develop a law that is stronger, that is more efficient, and you have a lot of Liberians involved with it. So I think in terms of best practice would be to be most practical with what is possible. One of the downside of the Liberian experience is we are establishing a court uh, about 34, 35 years when the war started. In terms of evidence gathering, that's a big challenge. That's a big challenge in terms of how much is possible. Going back to places, people who were accused of war crimes, some of the evidence may not be there. Some of the evidence may just not be there. We're talking about Rwanda, we're talking about Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone established a code right after the Lomé Agreement in 1999. I think the code in Sierra Leone was established 2001. So that's just about 2 years away from 2 years away from that process. And then you have that less resources spent in the process. So Liberia is 34 years away uh, since the rebellion started. We're 21 years away now since we signed the Accra Peace Agreement. So we are really in a march against time. Evidence gathering under these circumstances are often difficult, and so one of going back to your earlier question about human rights education and transitional justice would be to prepare the society, because everyone, most Liberians have in their mind who they think should be prosecuted.
Mhm.
The judicial process is a little difficult. You follow the situation with Jibril Massacre, the Sierra Leonean who was accused of war crimes in Liberia. He's he's been acquitted. The prosecution could not find the evidence to really hold him uh,
Mhm.
to, to to find him guilty. In the case of Liberia, there are people who in their imagination know about people who committed war crimes. But if you do not have the evidence against such a person, is likely to this person is likely to walk, and that alone can be a despair. That can be a big act of frustration in a society. So there has to be a lot that we deal with in terms of what is possible with the war crimes code. Is good news, but there's a lot of difficulty to it than we seem to be aware.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're just joining us, this is a New Day conversation. And today we're in conversation with Mr. Aaron, where we're talking about the news, the recent news where the legislature approved of this setup. Actually, the House did and the Senate recently for some time ago, and the Senate recently did. So we're talking what next, what is going to happen, and like Mr. Weah said from the beginning, it has to go through a few other signing, whether the executive approves it and then becomes law, and then what next, is going to happen. So we're just talking about the implications, the challenges that may happen, what are opportunities that could come out of this new development. So thank you for joining us on a new day today. Let's talk about understanding the correlation that you made recently, Aaron. I shared it on my page. You had an interview with Africa Reports, right? And then in that interview, you highlighted a connection between wartime impunity and post-war corruption in Liberia. Could you expand on how these issues are intertwined and discuss the importance of addressing both to stabilize and bring justice to Liberia?
So the the point I made about there's a correlation with wartime impunity and post-war corruption is that during the period of war and the successive peace agreements we had, we saw a subculture create and develop. There were amnesty in exchange for stability. There were power sharing government develop, and particularly in the case of Liberia, we had 13 peace agreements. All of those peace agreements granted amnesty repeatedly to warlords until the Accra Agreement came, and that a transitional justice mechanism was negotiated and integrated as part of the peace process. The point I made in that interview was that there is a connection that we don't see, that we're not aware of. There's a connection between wartime impunity and post-war corruption. Today, you have officials of government who are not involved with the war, uh, who think it is okay to take 150,000 because the
Yeah, I
person
thought
who
that was interesting, though. So that's what I wanted you to
Yeah,
talk
the
about.
person who committed the Lutheran Church massacre, the person who committed the Cowfield massacre has never been held to account. So I'm just an ordinary minister of government. It's okay for me to take home 50,000 and not be held accountable. So what you see here is the normalization of of wrongdoing because there is the previous wrongdoing that have never been held to account. And another point I made with this correlation with wartime impunity and post-war Liberia is the issue of rape in the Liberian society. We
Yeah.
see, you read a newspaper, you see young kids, a young girl as young as 11, 12 is being raped. Sometimes the family come and cover this up because the Liberian judicial system is a product of the war. There's a whole lot of political interference. No one has really been held to account. I went to school in Liberia, and you don't pass by a prison and you see a former minister of government in prison. In big societies around the world, you have these prisons that are signposts. They are signposts. They are example of a big man who's went out of the law, is arrested, he's prosecuted, and he's doing time. In Liberia, we don't have that. So when I made that point about someone is taking 150,000, 200,000 as a government official, and no one holds them responsible, he's doing that with an awareness that during the Civil War, people committed so much and
Mhm.
they were never held to account. So it's that relationship between the post-war in a peacetime, well, we see this is happening in a peacetime, and this is corruption. But there is a link, there is a connection between the attitude of war and doing the attitude of peacetime, and we have to create a conversation where we make people are aware that these two things are not mutually exclusive. They are, in fact, very reinforcing in a society where people are generally not held are not accountable for the wrongdoing.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. I thought that was an interesting correlation when I heard you talk about that. All right. So now let's talk about the implications for policy. Considering the link between pastime impunity and ongoing corruption, what policies or actions should a new economic crimes court adapt to disrupt this cycle effectively?
Well, I think the main, because the international code or the hybrid code is not coming to stay. It's going to have a mandate. The mandate could be 5 years, could be 7 years, and that mandate would be uh, based on the law that we see shortly established by the legislature. The mandate would be violations of this type would be investigated. People of this rank and people in this chain of command, because the logic of war crimes everywhere, it is pretty much conditioned to investigating a chain of command, people who had a command authority to authorize the perpetration of war crimes. The law is, in the case of Liberia, we will see what the definition will be in terms of who bear the greatest responsibility. In terms of policy, we will see that the code is going to go after people within a certain category and it's going to prosecute them. And what happens there in the case of Sierra Leone, I think Sierra Leone, if I'm in the case of Liberia at the moment, in our penal law, we do not have international law as part of it. It's everything very domestic. So when a code leaves, that might impact Liberia Liberia judiciary or Liberia jurisprudence in terms of how do we now learn from this experience and adopt as part of our body of laws these type of violations, because the country is now exposed to war crimes. We have all of these advocacy saying, hey, 250,000 person killed, this is no small number. You can't wipe this under the rug. You have to shake up the society. You have to clean it up so that the society can move into a brighter future. So in terms of policy, when the court is done and done with his work and moved out of Liberia, I believe strongly serious political leadership will look back and say, we have to make this as part of a standing part of the Liberian legal system, part of the Liberian legal regime, because currently our legal regime doesn't have a place for war crimes. It's not written in our books. Our laws are sort of blind to the definition of war crimes. Is blind. In 2018, the Bar Association, I worked with a team of Liberian activists and the Bar Association, putting together the draft act of a war crimes code in Liberia under the leadership of Tiawon Gonglo. And you can see how Liberian lawyers were dealing with this. It was a new experience in terms of war crimes and the Liberian judicial system. They were just too unfamiliar territory.
So, even with the international, so now that you just said it's going to be a new phenomenon in our justice framework, what are the most significant challenges you foresee in setting up and operating an economic crimes court? Maybe not really for international community because that's international community, but if we manage to say, okay, let's keep this, even as the international community leave us, how can we navigate challenges to ensure that the court is effective?
I think one we have to do with resources.
Okay.
It has to
Always
do with resources. Yeah, resources will play a key role. The second most important thing would be what kind of communication do we put out there in towns and villages? Much of Liberia is still disconnected. Community radios are one of the main sources of information, factual information. So for the code to be successful, you will need the full participation of Liberians across the country who are aware, because you need people to come forward to give testimony. You need people to come forward and say, yes, I lived through the Civil War. I can attest to this. I can attest to that. But long before that happens, you will have Liberian lawyers trained in developing case file, going across the country to develop the evidence against a particular individual. All of that will require the right skill level. It will require the budget, the budgetary support. We're hearing all of these news that we will have some good partners that will come and support all of this initiative.
Okay.
But until that, these are all just speculations about where the resources will come from. I do not think the government of Liberia has the money to support this endeavor. So for this to be successful, we will need the required level of support to see this through. We will need training of Liberian who have training in general Liberian law to be involved with understanding what is international law to the extent of war crimes, and so a lot needs to happen for this to be successful. And then, as I said earlier, another important ingredient to happen that needs to happen is for the entire society to be placed to be in the right place to really think through the experiences of the war in a more uh, thoughtful way, so Liberians know that, why did we kill so much people here? How did this happen? How can we prevent this from happening again? Ethnic violence is a very big part of the conversation that needs to happen. Why did we have, if you follow the TRC hearings, in one of the hearings, we heard that in Libya, before some of the warring factions came, they had the names of people written down. It really wasn't a civil war that was planned to remove an individual and you come and replace a more responsible government. It was a mission in some part of the planning of the civil war. It was some form of ethnic hatred. Certain ethnic groups were targeted. If you belong to this group, you were targeted, you were killed. So part of the conversation that is going to be provoked by this thing would be, why did Liberians kill other Liberians only because they were part of a certain ethnic group? The second most important part would be, how can we make communities safe again? Neighbors turn against neighbors. Neighbors say, "Oh, that person is a Mandingo man. This person is a crime man. This person is a Gio man. This person." Some of these people may never be tried. Some of these people may never face the war crimes court because they were civilians, but they were pointing fingers. How can we have a war crimes court that even those who were in civilian clothes, who may never be prosecuted, but then you will have a conversation that, challenge someone and say, yes, I did my share of evil. I am no better than this man who pulled the trigger. That is a deeper level of conversation that I think this exercise is going to push the society into. And if we are more conscientious about how we engage with this, I think Liberia will emerge a better society. Sierra Leone
Oh,
almost came at the brink of civil war in October last year. One who asks, this is a country that had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and had a special code for Sierra Leone. What explained that level of violence that we saw in Sierra Leone in October? What can we learn from it? How can we be more conscientious in the way we engage with this?
okay. We're going to take a few comments or questions, and then we will continue. I have more questions for you, Aaron, and some of my questions you're already covering them anyway. But yeah, there is a question here from Riverses Pro. He's saying, "What is a hybrid court?" And then, do you want to take them one at a time, or do you want me to just go through? Let me go through a few of them,
Yeah,
a few of them, and then you can come on. Dennis is saying this is eye opening. Perpetrators are not the demons who make them to look. I think that was when you were talking about
yeah,
Okay, so you remember what he was responding to. Yes. So he says some were coerced, coopted to behave the way they did. I'm wondering how we prepare the Liberian population to understand the complexities and intricacies of the war before undertaking this endeavor. When I watched the Senate deliberations on the resolution to establish the War Crime Court, it shows some of them lack the basic understanding. I think to some extent, oh, basic. Okay, that's the that's the key word. And then Ahmed says, Aaron, thank you for focusing on Ahmed Salif. Aaron, thank you for focusing on these issues. I understand why you seemingly are equating the benefits. Oh, I wonder why you seemingly are equating the benefits of a war in economic crimes court for Liberia to potentially the number of individuals who will be persecuted and cost of that persecution and length of time such court will take. Isn't it also about that the persecutions will serve as a deterrent by addressing a culture of impunity? And then Ahmed Salif again. Hasn't international law already established the precedent of only persecuting, in quotation, those with the greatest responsibilities, command, and control? Aaron, do you want to address
yeah,
those?
yeah. So thanks, Ahmed. Ahmed question about
The
I
first,
try to lay emphasis on the number of person prosecuted in Sierra Leone, the length of time the code was established, 11 to 12 years, at a budget of almost 350 million. The point there is not to discuss the issue of proportionality, that with this length of time, you must have this number of person. Sierra Leone special code opened the door for a lot of reflection and a lot of learning. What I was also, my point on that was with a prior question Priscilla asked regarding education and human rights education and transitional justice learning. I was
yeah,
my response to that question was part of this exercise is to prepare the larger society to sort of tempo down the expectation of the larger society, because everyone, the TRC has really created. We have to understand the relationship or the sequencing between when this code is established and since the TRC report was released. In this sequence, there are high expectations on the part of some Liberians, what they personally expect to see happen. Some people have their own list of those who they want to see prosecuted. So my reaction to this was, this is not the case. The law works differently. When the code is eventually established and the process is set in motion, and those who are accused and they go out to find the evidence, people may be shocked that if the mandate of the code is for 5 years and 6 years, we may have far less people who have been tried and prosecuted based on the level of evidence that is available. I made a reference to Jibril Massacre, who was accused of war crimes perpetrated in northern Liberia, in Lofa, and somewhere on the breach. I was involved with monitoring that trial when it was being held in a secret location in Monrovia. And it started 2001, and the trial just ended this year because there was an appeal on the initial verdict, which acquitted Gibril massacre. So if you check from 2001 to now, how long has it taken? This is one individual. This is one individual who has used up so much resources and so much time. So my reference to that was essentially to make that point that the law works differently. People have their own expectations. Much of this expectation has been raised by the TRC report, and it has approached with the issue of naming names. So part of the communication that the society need to be engaged with is to lower expectation, is to allow the law to work the best way that it is supposed to to engage. The point about and I see Dennis's point about perpetrators are not demon. Yes, and, it's important that we we stop the sort of I would say very simplistic discourse that puts a binary between victim and perpetrator. There were people who at the University of Liberia who took up arms. They didn't wake up the next day knowing that they would take on an AK-47. Their personal circumstances changed. If I was old enough when the war started and my mom was killed, I perhaps wouldn't be sitting in this chair. It's a natural human response where the worst in us come out based on the circumstances. So part of the healing process, part of the what is expected of this exercise is to
But
troubleshoot
you
our.
also, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
you also added this is not to justify or excuse
yeah.
uh,
This
people
is
action.
not by any means to justify people action, but it's just to see what the human condition is capable of, and is to see in every bad person the good in him. That when you have a civil war and this, I had an interview 2 years ago. I went to Lofa and I traveled to Bagadu, and I had an interview with the community, and you should see how fresh the incident of July 12th is still on the mind of that small town. People who woke up innocently to a day, and that whole day was shaped by one major tragedy, and how the plan was to eliminate the entire Bagatu town. So when I hear people paint the Liberian Civil War in these neat categories of victim and perpetrator, not knowing that one man who is considered a perpetrator was initially a victim, and he was pushed into that role as a victim when he tried to find his own way. How can a society learn from this complexity? And for me, is where much of the society we stand the opportunity of being better, of coming out of this process uh, stronger than before. And then I mentioned a point about communities. How can we? I don't think I think in the 80s when I was a kid growing up, communities was far better than we have now. During the Civil War, you have people who were neighbors showing their friends' neighbors out. This man is a Mandingo man. This man is a crime man. This man is a kill man. And these people were killed. These neighbors will not be tried before the War Crimes Court. How can we have a conversation that deal with all of this? And then one of the question on hybrid and international code. So one of the example of a hybrid code, the international code, was Sijan Kaba wrote to the UN, and the UN mandated the establishment of a special code for Sierra Leone. The special code for Sierra Leone carries a certain UN mandate. It's part of the UN own operation, whereas a hybrid code is more of an internationalized code that is governed by both nationals and international. So I
Right.
think the key distinguishing factor here is the special code has a certain UN sort of element to it, but the UN is moving away from that now. It's supporting much more of a hybrid process. Yeah,
So that the local people can own the process or
and
have
be
a
involved. Yeah.
equal stake in the process.
Yep.
Okay, and then Ahmed and Salif, other question or comment, oh, that's a question, also was, has the international law already established the precedent of only persecuting, in quotation, those with the greatest responsibilities, command, and control?
Yeah. So Ahmed, on this question, so in the case of Liberia, the TRC determined that there were, I think, 11 or 12 warring factions. How do we define those with the greatest responsibility? So there are multiple layers of command responsibilities in armed conflict. One of the layers of command responsibility has to do with heads of warring factions. So part of the logic of the code could be, well, we will prosecute all heads of warring factions, those still alive. To date, we have not many heads of warring factions around. A few of them have died out. So maybe someone might say, all right, we'll go at the next tier level for in terms of command responsibility. So those who bear the greatest responsibility could be at different levels in the chain of command. We've seen currently we've seen the use of universal jurisdiction in Western Europe and America. We're also seeing how domestic laws is being domestic laws are being applied to some Liberians who have committed immigration violation by trying to hide their wartime past, and they've been prosecuted out there. And some of those who've been prosecuted were not as high in the military command, but they've been tried and prosecuted on the use of universal jurisdiction. That this guy, we know him, he was involved with the war. He did this particular act, committed this particular act, so he's been prosecuted. So the definition of greatest responsibility can lend itself to lots of interpretation.
Okay. So I had a few more questions. So the other one, thank you, Aaron. What outcome do you expect from the Economic Crimes Court in terms of tackling the entrenched corruption that has plagued Liberia following the civil wars? How can a court ensure comprehensive accountability for past and present offenses? And then quickly, I'm going to just throw in this one, international best practices. Can you share examples from other nations tackling war crimes and corruption simultaneously? What lessons can Liberia draw from these examples to enhance the effectiveness of its economic crimes court?
Please state the first question again. I was a little not so clear on it.
The first question is, what outcomes do you expect from the Economic Crimes Court in terms of tackling the entrenched corruption that has plagued Liberia following the civil wars? How can the court ensure comprehensive accountability for past and present offenses?
Great. So on the issue of economic crimes, it would be good to see how the law is written up and the mandate given to the court, and how, if you've seen the resolution that has recently passed, the resolution is talking about two different courts. Two different courts should be established. So will the other court be a national court, or will the other court still be a hybrid court or tribunal? It's not really clear yet. But what I do know, when the TRC Act, which was passed in 2005, it talks about it. The Liberian TRC Act is one in transitional justice history, is one of the first law that has written systematically for economic crimes to be investigated as one of the strategy of war. And the logic, the logic for economic crimes is that the Liberian war prolonged because of the informal economy that was created as a result of it. So you have multinational corporations involved with Liberia because they were not paying taxes, they were mining logs, they were involved with lots of other business operations that will otherwise be compliant with a former regime in terms of tax paying. So the spirit of that law was basically every organization, private organization that profited from the Liberian war in this form, in the shape and form, should be answerable before a court. And secondly, there were individuals who were primarily involved with enriching themselves into forced recruitment and benefiting from the different economic centers within the war. Diamond Creek, you have rubber plantation, and so the entire idea of economic crime was basically to investigate people who created the environment of war, who created environment of conflict, so that there can be smooth business operation being conducted under that climate, and of anarchy, under that climate of chaos, because it provided good profit, it provided good business operations. So the TRC law says that institutions, if you look at the TRC report, you will see a long list of businesses, including Firestone, that profited from the Liberian Civil War. So So it will be good to see when the law is finally written out, how it describes defined economic crimes within the spirit of the TRC report or the TRC Act, or whether it is slightly removed from what the TRC Act says. So that would be one thing to keep an eye on. Keep an eye on. Yeah. The next question, Priscilla.
So because of time, I'm just going to skip it and just I want to zero in on. I think you alluded to this, but if you could just zero in on this one about the impact on social justice, like what overall impact do you envision that the War Crimes Court having on achieving social justice in Liberia?
Okay.
How
So
how,
I think
how do you yeah?
I think
How do
there's
you
going to be
envision the War
I think
Crimes
there are a
Court?
lot of benefits that. So because the TRC report has been contested, uh, you cannot write on national history uh, on on the strength of the TRC report, because facts, military institutions, it would be within their right to sue you because the TRC report has been challenged. But all of a judicial process where the rule of the MPFL, the rule of the IMPFL, the rule of all of the other warring factions have been investigated and the facts have been established, you can now move on to say, this is what really happened. This has been tested at the highest level. It's met all of the judicial standards.
Okay.
Uh, this is the evidence here to support it. The TRC report doesn't provide much evidence to back up some of the claims made in the report. So that's the one. That's one
That's
thing.
interesting to know.
The second point I wanted to make: when I used to work at the Governance Commission in 2013, we had the what we refer to then as the Organizing History Conference. The purpose of that conference was to begin the process of writing a general and comprehensive history for Liberia, a history writing process that will follow the model of UNESCO. Again, at that meeting, it was agreed that the kind of history to write was not a revisionist history, it was to write a history that clearly followed the evidence. And it was agreed at that meeting that Liberian history will be written in 5 volumes. The project will go for 5 years, blah, blah, blah. Part of the challenge, and the more I reflect on that, will be how do you write on the period of the Civil War when the National Commission that was established to produce the final report has been contested? The TRC report has been contested. So the War Crimes Code is going to lay this matter to rest once and for all the facts that we need to write about a history book to be taught in schools, to teach 10th graders, to teach ninth grader about what the war was about. It will not be settled. Have you read some of the documents put together, some of the reports put together after the trial in France, of the trial in Switzerland on Koshu? I mean, it is very detailed in terms of historical facts, in terms of historical records. It
Mm.
is really, really detailed. The last point I want to make here is we will now have, when this code is established and is done, and we want to have,
So we're
like you
talking
have,
about long term benefit now,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
One of the second benefits, third benefits, yeah, you will now have all of the ingredients to design a war memorial for Liberia, because all of the facts will be there. All of these testimonies will now amount to solid historical record to say yes, and we can now come up with a memorial. Like you have the Kigali Memorial in Rwanda, you have the Vietnam Memorial in DC and elsewhere. Now we can do that because there is still a conflict of what the conflict is about in Liberia. There is still a
Mm.
conflict of what the conflict is about.
It's
But when we
about
go to court,
what's about.
that conflict will be settled. When we go to court, that conflict will now be resolved. There will no longer be that meta conflict of what the conflict is about. The judicial process is going to deal with all of that. So it's going to resolve a lot of these lingering issues, these issues that are roadblocks within the way. How do we produce a textbook on the Liberian history? What are the facts around the Duporo massacre? What are the facts around the Carterfield massacre? All of that will be resolved in terms of historical facts. What happened? Who did this? And why? These are important questions in historical narrative and historical records. So the code is going to help us deal with that once and for all. The Lutheran Church, we will now have the facts around the Lutheran Church. The Cow Field, the Maher Bridge, we will have the facts on it. The TRC report provides some very valuable information, but the judicial process becomes a much higher standard. Truth Commission are quasi-judicial. Judicial are judicial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me quickly share this comment that Ahmed Salif made, and then we will wrap our era. I wanted us to stick to 1 hour. So Ahmed say you are right. Ahmed says you are right with your comments earlier, Aaron, about the uniqueness of each conflict and context, which is why war crimes courts are established based on the nature of alleged violations in legal traditions of the context. In Cambodia, for example, they established a hybrid model in Cambodian high courts, while in Rwanda and former Yugoslavia, it was international criminal tribunals, internationalized. And the Sierra Leone one you mentioned. Did you want to say something about this?
No, I think Ahmed made a good point there already. He made a very good.
Okay.
Thanks, Ahmed, for complimenting me and providing further information. That's very helpful.
All right. Okay, Aaron, is there, I mean, there's just a lot. I don't want to go up. So, I mean, everyone and you especially, I'm grateful for the time you spent here. So, is there anything you want to hone home as we and wrap up the conversation for today?
Well, I just want to say thank you. This is a good platform. You and Dennis are creating very informed content, and I think
Thank
we need more of this when the code is established, so that Liberian in the diaspora. I know I'm at work with the Diaspora Project. There isn't much that Liberians back home know about the Diaspora Report. It's important that as the code has been established, so that there can be this dialogue between the homeland and the diaspora, so people have clearly, what does the report in the diaspora really say? What is and how are these both report providing the kind of clarity we need throughout this process? So I think what you have here is a very good initiative, and we will need more of this. There is a dearth, as you know, of information back home. People don't know as much as we all should, and so it's important that you bring people here who are knowledgeable and can help to contribute to the space. But I think this is a good start. There's going to be a long and tough road. As this code, people just think the code is going to be a quick fix. It's not going to be a quick fix. In fact, I think it's going to challenge the society morally in terms of what really happened in Liberia, because we're going to hear stories. Stories going to really challenge us. I mean, I've been doing this work like 20 years now, so I'm looking forward to it a lot more. Thank you very much for having me, Ahmed, and the rest of you with your very thoughtful questions. Thank you also for that.
Okay. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you, Aaron, for spending this Sunday with us. And thanks to our viewers for joining us as well. Let's continue the dialogue. Let's elevate our voices and actively participate in shaping a world where social justice isn't an aspiration, but a reality. So join us next time on a new day as we continue to explore and advocate for social reform. Remember, change begins with a conversation. Let's make every day a new day for progress. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to see you in the next episode. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Priscilla. Look forward to seeing you all. Ahmed, Dennis, thank you all.
Okay, take care
Yeah,
now. Bye
bye.
bye.